The Evening Call. Chapter 1. The Ritual. Every evening at 7 o'clock, without fail, Jamie Crawford performed his sacred duty. He would abandon whatever game he was playing, whatever cartoon he was watching, whatever homework he was spectacularly avoiding, and march to the landline phone in the kitchen. His mother had offered him her mobile 100 times, but Jamie insisted on the kitchen phone. It had better sound quality, he claimed. Though really it was because Grandma Rose had always called it our phone, and that made it special. The phone would ring exactly twice before she picked up. "Hello, my darling boy." Grandma Rose's voice would boom through the receiver, as warm and comforting as hot chocolate on a winter's day, and roughly as sweet. "Hi, Grandma," Jamie would reply, settling into the kitchen chair that he'd claimed as his official phone talking chair. It had a wobbly leg, but that was part of its charm. What followed was a meticulously organized chaos of conversation. Jamie, at 9 years old, had perfected the art of cramming approximately 17 different topics into a single phone call. He would tell her about how Marcus Johnson had brought a lizard to school in his lunchbox. It escaped during math. How Mrs. Patterson had accidentally called the principal mum during assembly. The whole school had laughed for approximately 400 years. And how he'd finally, beaten level 12 of Dragon Quest Warriors, which Grandma Rose definitely understood and was definitely very impressed by, even though she thought a PlayStation was something you did at the beach. Grandma Rose had a remarkable talent for following Jamie's conversational pinball machine. She would gasp at all the right moments, laugh at his jokes. Even the terrible ones, especially the terrible ones. And ask follow-up questions that proved she was actually listening. Unlike his parents, who sometimes got that glazed look that meant they were thinking about work or bills or other boring adult things. And then, Jamie would say, building to whatever he considered that day's headline news, "Mr. Henderson's toupee flew off during a fire drill." It did not. Grandma Rose would exclaim, delighted. It did. It landed on the Year 6 trophy cabinet. Well, I never. This was, Jamie knew, Grandma Rose's favorite expression. She said it about everything from escaped lizards to flying toupees to the price of milk these days. Jamie had once counted her saying it 14 times in a single conversation. The calls typically lasted 30 to 40 minutes, which Jamie's mother said was quite long for a 9-year-old's attention span. But Jamie and Grandma Rose had things to discuss. Important things. Like whether chocolate digestives were better than custard creams. They weren't, but Jamie liked to argue. And whether you could actually dig to China if you tried hard enough. Grandma Rose said no, you'd hit Australia first. Which seemed wrong, but Jamie trusted her completely. Sometimes Grandpa Joe would shout something in the background. Usually it was, "Tell him I said hello," or, "Ask him if he's doing his homework." Grandpa Joe was lovely, but he was what Grandma Rose called a man of few words. Those few words were usually about homework, eating vegetables, or not staying up too late. "Grandpa says hello." Grandma Rose would translate. "Tell him I say hello back and yes, I'm doing my homework." Jamie would lie cheerfully. This was their routine. Their ritual. As dependable as the sunrise, as reliable as the theme tune to his favorite show, as consistent as his father's dad jokes at dinner. Until Tuesday. Chapter 2. A slight change in programming. Tuesday started like any other day. Jamie endured school. Mostly. Enjoyed lunch. Entirely. And suffered through double science. Tragically. He raced home, shouted a greeting to his mother who was doing something complicated with spreadsheets in her home office, grabbed a snack, and waited for 7 o'clock with the patience of a caffeinated squirrel. 7 o'clock arrived. Jamie dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Jamie frowned. Grandma Rose always answered before the third ring. It was practically the law. 4 rings. 5 rings. Jamie was just beginning to imagine elaborate scenarios, involving Grandma Rose being kidnapped by very polite pirates, when someone picked up. Hello. It wasn't Grandma Rose. Grandpa Joe? Jamie said, surprised. Hello, Jamie lad. Grandpa Joe's voice was calm, steady, exactly the same as always. How are you doing? I'm good. Where's Grandma? Well, she's got a bit of a sore throat, you see. Doctor says she needs to rest her voice for a few days. No talking. Jamie's eyes widened. Grandma Rose, not talking? That was like the ocean not having water. Like the sky not having up. Like school not having that weird smell. Is she okay? Jamie asked, concerned. Oh, perfectly fine, lad. Just needs rest. But she didn't want you to miss your call, so she's asked me to fill in. That all right with you? Oh. Jamie said. Yeah, of course. Brilliant. So then, how was school? Jamie hesitated for just a moment. Talking to Grandpa Joe was different. Grandpa Joe was great, obviously, but he was more of a birthday and Christmas grandparent. Grandma Rose was the everyday one. But she was listening, wasn't she? She was probably sitting right there, unable to talk, eager to hear about his day. Well, Jamie began. Marcus Johnson brought a snake to school today. Another reptile? Grandpa Joe interrupted, and Jamie could hear the smile in his voice. Yeah. Mrs. Patterson screamed so loud. And just like that, they were off. It was different from talking to Grandma Rose, certainly. Grandpa Joe didn't gasp quite as dramatically, and he said, I see. More than. Well, I never. But he was listening. Really listening. He asked about the snake. It was actually just a grass snake, pretty harmless. About Jamie's math test. He got a B+, thank you very much. And about whether he was still avoiding vegetables. Absolutely yes, except for chips, which were clearly vegetables. The call lasted 25 minutes. Shorter than usual, but nice. Different, but nice. Tell Grandma I hope her throat feels better. Jamie said before hanging up. I will, lad. She sends her love. Chapter 3. The New Normal. Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock. Jamie dialed. Grandpa Joe answered. Still got the sore throat? Jamie asked. Afraid so, lad. These things take time. Jamie accepted this easily. His own throat had been sore for ages last winter. His mum had made him drink horrible honey and lemon tea that tasted like liquid sadness. Is Grandma drinking the honey tea? Jamie asked. Something like that. Grandpa Joe said. Now tell me about today. Thursday evening, 7 o'clock. Grandpa Joe answered again. Wow, that's a long time for a sore throat. Jamie observed. Yes. But she's getting better. Don't you worry. Jamie didn't worry. Why would he? Grandpa Joe sounded calm and steady as always. Grandma Rose was probably just being careful, making sure she was completely better before she started chatting again. Adults were weird about health things. His dad still did special exercises for his back, even though he'd hurt it 2 years ago. By Friday, it felt almost normal. Grandpa Joe had developed his own rhythm. He didn't just say I see anymore. He'd started adding little comments like, Marcus and his menagerie, eh? And, Mrs. Patterson must be having quite the year. He even remembered details from previous calls, which impressed Jamie enormously. How's the spelling test you were worried about? Grandpa Joe asked on Friday. Got 9 out of 10. Only missed accommodate because it has too many letters. That's a tricky one. Grandpa Joe agreed. Double C, double M. That's what Grandma always says. Well, she taught me, didn't she? Jamie grinned. That was true. Grandma Rose had been a teaching assistant for about 1,000,000 years. She knew all the tricks. The weekend arrived, and Jamie had so much to tell. He'd gone to the cinema with his friend Tyler. The new superhero film was amazing. He'd finally finished his art project. A clay dinosaur that looked more like a lumpy potato, but that was fine. And he'd discovered that if you mixed orange juice with lemonade, you got something that tasted like fizzy sunshine. Sounds revolting, Grandpa Joe said cheerfully. It was brilliant. Sunday's call felt comfortable. Easy. Jamie had stopped asking about Grandma Rose's throat, because Grandpa Joe had said she was getting better, and that was good enough. Besides, Grandpa Joe was turning out to be an excellent substitute. He even laughed at Jamie's terrible joke about the chicken crossing the road to get to the idiot's house. Knock knock. Who's there? The chicken. Chapter 4. The Question. Monday arrived again, completing a full week of Grandpa Joe answering the phone. Jamie was telling him about how the school hamster had escaped from its cage and been found sleeping in the headmaster's jacket pocket, when something occurred to him. Grandpa, Jamie said, pausing mid-story, can I talk to Grandma even if she can't talk back? I could just say hi or something. There was a brief pause. She's resting right now, lad. But I'll tell her you asked after her. She'll be pleased. Okay, Jamie said, satisfied. Anyway, the hamster was completely fine, but the headmaster. Tuesday, Jamie asked again, more specifically. When will Grandma's throat be better? Soon. Grandpa Joe said. Very soon. Wednesday. Can she write things down? Like, could she write a note and you could read it to me? She's trying not to strain herself at all, lad. Complete rest, doctor's orders. Thursday, Jamie's mother was hovering near the kitchen during the call. Jamie noticed her watching him with an odd expression. When he hung up, she asked, How's Grandma Rose? Still can't talk. Jamie reported. Sore throat. His mother's expression did something complicated. Right. She said. Of course. Friday evening, Jamie was telling Grandpa Joe about the upcoming school play. He was playing Tree Number 3, a role he took very seriously. When something shifted in his brain. A feeling. A small, uncomfortable feeling, like when you know you've forgotten something but can't remember what. Grandpa, Jamie said slowly. Where is Grandma? Like, is she in the hospital? No, nothing like that. Is she in the house? Jamie, lad. Is she okay? Really okay? Another pause. Longer this time. Jamie, Grandpa Joe said, his voice still steady but different somehow, gentler. I think it's time we had a chat. A proper one. Are your mum or dad around? Jamie's stomach did a small flip. Mum's here. Why? Could you put her on for just a moment? This was unprecedented. Grandpa Joe had never asked to speak to his mother during their calls. These were their calls. Jamie's and Grandma Rose's calls. Now Jamie's and Grandpa Joe's calls. Okay. Jamie said quietly. He went to his mother's office. She took one look at his face and immediately stood up. Grandpa Joe wants to talk to you, Jamie said. His mother's expression did that complicated thing again. She followed him to the kitchen and took the phone. Hello, Joe, she said softly. Jamie watched her face. He watched it do several things. Sad, then sadder, then something that looked like relief mixed with more sadness. She glanced at Jamie several times. She said, "Yes. And I understand. And thank you. And we'll come tomorrow." When she hung up, she knelt down so she was eye level with Jamie. "Sweetheart," she said, "Grandpa Joe wants us to visit tomorrow. He has something important to tell you." "About Grandma's throat?" His mother's eyes were shiny. "Sort of. But it's better if he explains it in person, okay?" Jamie nodded, though the uncomfortable feeling in his stomach was growing. Chapter 5. The Visit. The drive to Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe's house took 45 minutes. Usually, Jamie spent the journey playing I Spy, or listening to music, or asking, "Are we there yet?" at regular intervals. Today he was quiet. His mother kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Whatever Grandpa Joe needs to tell you," she said gently, "remember that we love you very much, and we're right here." This did not help the feeling in Jamie's stomach. Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe lived in a neat cottage, with a blue door and a garden that always smelled like roses. Obviously. And something else that Grandma Rose called hope and hard work, but was actually probably fertilizer. Jamie loved this house. It had creaky stairs and a biscuit tin that was never empty and a piano that nobody played but everyone agreed looked nice. Grandpa Joe opened the blue door before they even knocked. He looked the same as always. Tall, silver-haired, wearing his cardigan with the patches on the elbows. But there was something different in his eyes. Something tired. "Hello, lad," he said, smiling at Jamie. Come in, come in." The house felt wrong. It was too quiet. Normally Grandma Rose would be bustling about, putting the kettle on, asking if anyone wanted cake. The answer was always yes. Telling some elaborate story about the neighbor's cat. Now, there was just silence. They sat in the living room. Jamie's mother sat next to him on the sofa. Grandpa Joe took his usual armchair. On the table beside him was a photograph of Grandma Rose, smiling her enormous smile, wearing her favorite yellow cardigan. "Jamie," Grandpa Joe began, then paused. "This is very difficult, lad, so I'm just going to say it plain. Your Grandma Rose. She passed away. 12 days ago now." The words didn't make sense at first. They were English words, certainly. Jamie knew all of them individually. But together, they formed a sentence that his brain refused to process. "But," Jamie said, "you said she had a sore throat." "I know, lad. I'm sorry. That wasn't true. But I've been talking to you every night." "Yes, you have. And you said she was getting better." "I know." Jamie looked at his mother. She had tears running down her face. He looked back at Grandpa Joe, who was gripping the arms of his chair tightly. "I don't understand," Jamie said. His voice sounded strange. Small. Grandpa Joe leaned forward. "Your Grandma Rose," he said. "She loved talking to you every evening. It was the highlight of her day. When we lost her, I thought about you, about how you'd call at 7 o'clock and she wouldn't be there to answer. And I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear the thought of you calling and getting nothing." He took a shaky breath. "So I answered instead. And I thought, I'll just do it once, just to make sure he doesn't worry. But then I thought, maybe twice. Maybe a few times. Maybe I could give you a little while to just be yourself before everything changed. Maybe I could give you a few more days of normal before the world got heavy." "You lied," Jamie said. It came out as barely a whisper. "I did," Grandpa Joe admitted. "I did, and I'm sorry for that. But I wanted to keep something of her alive. She would have wanted you to keep talking, keep sharing your days. And selfishly, lad, I needed to hear it. I needed to hear your stories. They made the house feel less empty. Jamie's brain was trying to catch up. She's dead? The word felt huge and wrong. She is, lad. I'm so sorry. For 12 days? Yes. And you pretended everything was normal? I did. Why didn't you just tell me? Grandpa Joe's eyes were wet now too. Because I'm a foolish old man who couldn't figure out how to say goodbye to her, so I thought I'd give you a bit more time before you had to. Because telling you would make it real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real. Because I wanted you to have a few more days of thinking the world was safe and Grandma Rose was just resting. Jamie felt hot and cold at the same time. Angry and sad and confused and like everything was tilting sideways. I want to go home, he said to his mother. Okay, she said softly. Okay, sweetheart. Chapter 6. The silence. Jamie didn't call anyone that evening. His mother said he didn't have to, that it was okay to miss a day. He sat in his room instead, not playing games or watching TV or doing anything really. Just sitting. His dad came in at one point. Grandpa Joe feels terrible, he said. He knows he handled it wrong. Jamie said nothing. He loved her very much, you know. They were married for 46 years. He wasn't thinking straight. Jamie still said nothing. His dad sighed and left him alone. At 7 o'clock, Jamie stared at his wall. Somewhere across town, the phone in Grandma Rose's cottage wasn't ringing. Grandpa Joe was probably sitting in his chair, alone, waiting for a call that wasn't coming. Good, Jamie thought fiercely. Then he felt terrible for thinking it. Chapter 7. The Realization. Wednesday evening, Jamie's mother made his favorite dinner. Fish fingers and chips, obviously vegetables. But he barely ate it. Do you want to talk about it? She asked. No. Do you want to talk about Grandma Rose? No. Do you want to? No. She didn't push. Thursday after school, Jamie found himself thinking about the phone calls. About Grandpa Joe asking about the spelling test, remembering Marcus and his reptiles, laughing at the terrible chicken joke. He'd been listening. Really listening. Friday evening, 7 o'clock approached and Jamie felt it like a weight. The ritual was broken. Grandma Rose was gone. Everything was different. But something was bothering him. Scratching at the back of his brain. He thought about Grandpa Joe answering the phone, night after night. Grandpa Joe, who didn't usually talk much. Grandpa Joe, who was a man of few words. Except he hadn't been, had he? Not on those calls. Jamie thought about Grandpa Joe's voice asking, "How was school?" and, "Tell me more," and actually caring about the answers. He thought about Grandpa Joe remembering details, following stories, being patient with Jamie's meandering explanations of video game plots. He thought about what Grandpa Joe had said. I needed to hear it. I needed to hear your stories. They made the house feel less empty. Grandpa Joe had been alone in that house. Alone for the first time in 46 years. And instead of sitting in silence, he'd answered the phone. He'd kept the ritual alive. Not just for Jamie. For both of them. Jamie went to find his mother. Can we call Grandpa Joe? He asked. She looked surprised. Of course, sweetheart. Of course we can. Chapter 8. The New Ritual. The phone rang twice before Grandpa Joe picked up. Hello. His voice was uncertain. Hi, Grandpa. A sharp intake of breath. Jamie? Yeah. Silence. Then. I'm glad you called, lad. More silence. Jamie didn't know what to say. He'd been angry, and he was still sad, and everything was still confusing. But he also knew something important now. I'm sorry I lied to you, Grandpa Joe said quietly. It was wrong. I should have told you the truth from the start. Were you scared? Jamie asked. Terrified. Of what? Of saying it out loud. Of hearing you cry. Of making it real. Of being alone with it. Grandpa Joe's voice cracked. Your grandma, she was my best friend, lad. And I didn't know how to be in this house without her. I still don't, really. But hearing you talk about school and Marcus and his zoo of classroom pets, it helped. It made the quiet less loud. Jamie understood this. Sometimes when he was sad, his mother would turn on the TV just for noise, just so the house didn't feel so empty. I miss her, Jamie said. Me too, lad. Every moment of every day. I wanted to tell her about the school play. I'm tree number 3. She would have been so proud. Grandpa Joe's voice was thick with tears. She loved when you were in plays. Remember when you were sheep number 5 in the nativity? I was a really good sheep. You were an excellent sheep. They talked for 20 minutes. It was different from before. Sadder, heavier, with longer pauses. But it was also honest. They talked about Grandma Rose. About how she couldn't cook spaghetti without making a disaster of the kitchen. About how she sang loudly and terribly in the car. About how she gave the best hugs in the entire world. Can I still call you? Jamie asked before hanging up. Every evening. I'd like that very much, lad. I'd like that very much indeed. Chapter 9. Tree number 3. The school play was on a Thursday. Jamie wore his tree costume. Brown tights, green top, cardboard branches. With immense dignity. His mother and father sat in the third row, beaming. In the seat next to them was Grandpa Joe. He'd driven himself, which Jamie's mother said showed remarkable courage because Grandpa Joe hated driving in the dark. But he was there, wearing a tie. Which he only did for very special occasions. Holding a program that he'd already read cover to cover. Jamie was excellent as tree number 3. He stood very still when required, rustled his branches at the appropriate moments, and delivered his one line. The forest welcomes you. With the gravitas of a Shakespearean actor. Afterward, Grandpa Joe gave him a hug that lasted a long time. Your grandma would have burst with pride, he said. I wish she could have seen it. Jamie said. She did, lad. I promise you she did. They went for ice cream after, the 4 of them. Grandpa Joe told stories about Grandma Rose that made them all laugh and cry. He told them about how she'd once accidentally dyed all their white clothes pink in the wash. About how she'd tried to learn to play the piano and given up after 2 weeks because she said the piano was deliberately being difficult. About how she'd loved birds and would get irrationally angry at squirrels for eating from the bird feeders. She sounds like she was funny, Jamie said. She was hilarious. Grandpa Joe agreed. Completely bonkers, but hilarious. Chapter 10. 7 o'clock. Months passed. Winter turned to spring. Jamie moved up to year 5. Marcus Johnson stopped bringing animals to school. His mother put her foot down after the incident with the stick insects. Mrs. Patterson retired, and the new teacher was much younger and hadn't yet developed the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd taught primary school for too long. Every evening at 7 o'clock, Jamie called Grandpa Joe. Sometimes they talked about the day's events. Sometimes they talked about Grandma Rose. Sometimes they talked about nothing much at all. Grandpa Joe came to dinner every Sunday. He'd started teaching Jamie to play chess, though Jamie was spectacularly terrible at it. They'd also started watching detective shows together, trying to guess who the murderer was. Grandpa Joe was much better at this than chess. One evening, Jamie asked, "Do you still miss her?" "Every day," Grandpa Joe said. "But it's different now." "At first, it was like a wound. Now it's more like a presence. She's not here, but she's not gone either." Does that make sense? It did, actually. Sometimes Jamie would see something funny and think, "I should tell Grandma Rose," before remembering. But then he'd tell Grandpa Joe instead. And Grandpa Joe would say, "She would have loved that." And it helped. "I'm glad you answered the phone," Jamie said. "Even though you lied." "Thank you, lad. I'm glad I answered too. And I'm sorry I lied." "It's okay. You were sad and scared and you did a weird thing. Mum says grief makes people act weird sometimes." "Your mum's a wise woman." "Yeah," Jamie agreed. "She wouldn't let me have a ferret though, so she's not that wise." Grandpa Joe laughed. It was a sound that came more easily now than it had in those first few weeks. Chapter 11. The Memory Box. For Jamie's 10th birthday, Grandpa Joe gave him something special. It was a wooden box, carefully polished, with a brass clasp. Inside were treasures. Photographs of Grandma Rose, letters she'd written, recipes in her handwriting. Including one for the world's most disappointing spaghetti. Her favorite yellow cardigan, which still smelled faintly of her perfume. And a notebook. "What's this?" Jamie asked, holding up the notebook. "Open it," Grandpa Joe said. Jamie opened it. The first page read, in Grandma Rose's distinctive loopy handwriting, "Things my brilliant grandson said." Page after page was filled with quotes. Things Jamie had said during their evening phone calls over the years. Observations about the world, terrible jokes, random questions, stories about school. "Marcus brought a tadpole to school. I think he's building an army." "Why is the sky blue but space is black? Is the sky just being show-offy?" "If I eat enough carrots, will I turn orange? Because I'm willing to try." Mrs. Patterson has 3 different angry faces. There's mildly annoyed, quite cross, and spectacularly furious. Jamie read through them all, laughing and crying at the same time. His mother and father were crying too. Grandpa Joe was smiling, tears running down his weathered face. "She wrote these down?" Jamie asked. "Every single one. Right after your calls. She said she wanted to remember them all." Jamie held the notebook like it was made of glass. Here was proof that those conversations had mattered. That his silly stories and random thoughts had been precious to someone. "Thank you," he whispered. "She loved you enormously, lad. You brought her so much joy." Jamie carefully put the notebook back in the box, along with all the other treasures. He would keep this box forever. He would open it when he needed to remember. When he needed to feel close to her. "Can I tell you something?" Jamie said to Grandpa Joe. "Anything, lad. When you first told me she was gone, I was really angry at you. I know. You had every right to be. But now I think I understand why you did it. You weren't ready to say goodbye. And maybe I wasn't either." Grandpa Joe nodded. "We needed a bit more time." "Yeah," Jamie said. "We needed a bit more time." Epilogue. The ritual continues. Years later. Many years later. Jamie would still remember those phone calls. He would remember Grandma Rose's laugh and, "Well, I never," and the way she made every small thing feel important. He would remember Grandpa Joe's steady voice saying, "Tell me about your day," night after night, keeping the ritual alive when it would have been easier to let it die. He would understand, eventually, that Grandpa Joe hadn't been trying to deceive him. He'd been trying to save them both. He'd been building a bridge between the before and after, giving them both time to cross it slowly instead of being thrown into the cold water of grief all at once. Was it the right thing to do? Maybe not. Probably not. But it was a human thing to do. A scared, sad, loving thing to do. And in the end, those phone calls had become their shared ritual. Not Jamie and Grandma Rose's anymore, but Jamie and Grandpa Joe's. A different kind of connection, but no less valuable. No less real. Jamie would call Grandpa Joe every evening at 7 o'clock all through secondary school. When he went to university, he'd call every Sunday instead. When he got his first job, he'd call when he could, which was still surprisingly often. And decades later, when Grandpa Joe was very old and Jamie wasn't young anymore, they would still have their calls. Still share their stories. Still make the quiet less loud for each other. Sometimes Jamie would tell his own children about Grandma Rose, about her terrible singing and her disasters in the kitchen and her enormous capacity for love. He'd tell them about Grandpa Joe too, about how he'd answered the phone when he didn't have to, how he'd listened when it would have been easier to hide. Was it wrong? Jamie's daughter asked once. That he didn't tell you right away? Jamie thought about it. Maybe, he said. But it was also kind. Sometimes people do the wrong thing for the right reasons. And sometimes that's okay. Every evening, somewhere in the world, phones ring. People connect across distances, sharing their days, their thoughts, their lives. Most of these calls are ordinary. Forgettable. Simple. But some calls mean everything. Some calls are rituals. Anchors. Bridges between hearts. Some calls are love, distilled into words and carried along telephone lines. Jamie understood this now. He'd learned it from a grandmother who listened like every word mattered, and from a grandfather who answered the phone when it rang, night after night, because he couldn't bear to let the silence win. 7 o'clock. Time to call.